Greetings, Training for Translators listeners. This is Corinne McKay with episode 13 of the Training for Translators podcast. And this episode's topic, I'm not making enough money. Let's dig a little deeper into that problem. This podcast episode originally appeared as a post on my blog on October 8th, 2024. So I'm going to read it and comment on it a little bit for you. I think that this idea of not making enough money is common to freelancers of all flavors, not just translators and interpreters. Lots of freelancers are correct that they aren't making enough money, and this is for a few reasons. I think most importantly, many freelancers underestimate or even way underestimate how much more money you need to earn as a freelancer compared to a job where you get salary and benefits. This equation between freelance income and a salary job, you're going to see different people giving you different opinions on how much more you need to make. Typically, I see people recommending that you multiply by about 1.4. If you want the freelance equivalent of a salary job that pays, let's just take a round number and say 100,000 US dollars a year, you need to earn about 140,000 to factor in all of the things that you pay for that a salary job would pay for if you have one. I think in the US and most other countries, the biggest factor there is going to be self-employment tax that you are effectively, I hate to put it this way, but it's true, you're effectively penalized for being self-employed because you pay the employer and the employee portions of certain taxes. You also have to put money into retirement. Maybe you rent an office. In the US, paying for healthcare can be a huge expense. You don't get any paid time off. You buy your own computer hardware and software. You pay for all kinds of services like an accountant. To pause here, one of the reasons that I often encourage people to treat themselves really well as a self-employed person, like be the great boss that you wish you had. If you are okay working for a lousy boss, why not at least work for a lousy boss who pays for your health insurance and gives you paid vacation and a retirement plan? But if you're going to treat yourself poorly as a quote unquote employee, why not work for a boss who treats you poorly and pays for a lot of other things for you besides just your salary? If you look at the most recent American Translators Association compensation survey and the most recent data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average income for freelance translators and interpreters is around 55,000 US dollars per year. Now, if we use that factor of 1.4, that's the equivalent of a salary job that pays around 40,000 US dollars a year. Now, I am not shaming anyone here. I just think it's worth noting that if you are at that $55,000 income level, I think it is worth asking yourself whether you would accept a salary job that paid $40,000. Now, another pause here is that the free in freelance is worth a lot to a lot of people. I have significant interests and commitments outside of work, more hobbies than I have time for. So for me, a salary job would have to pay a lot more than I make as a freelancer in order to be worth the freedom sacrifice to me. So I'm not purely saying, oh, if you're making $55,000, would you take a job that paid 40,000 on salary? Maybe you absolutely would not because you don't want a salary job at any income level. Another factor is in 2023, I earned 130,000 US dollars. So if we use that 1.4 multiplier, that is the equivalent of a salary job paying around $93,000. So that means that although I set that goal as a way to move closer to the freelance equivalent of a six-figure salary job, I'm still not there. I have even had other freelance translators and interpreters ask me. So in 2024, I made 125,000 US dollars. And I have even had people ask me, what do you do with all that money? And the reality is, I'm not laughing at those people. They're allowed to ask. But I think that the reality is, if you talked to someone who had 22 years of experience and 2 master's degrees in a professional field, would you sort of fall on the floor in amazement that they worked a salary job paying 93,000 US dollars? I honestly wouldn't. And the point I'm making there is you actually have to earn a lot of money as a freelancer to replace all of that stuff that an employer pays for. My third point is life is expensive. That sounds really basic and kind of dumb, but I think it is just true and it is worth saying. I live in Boulder, Colorado. And if we look at the MIT living wage calculator, so for those who live outside the US, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is a big technical university in Boston, Massachusetts, and they put out this tool called a living wage calculator that calculates basically how much you need to make to have a quote unquote living wage. And if I look at it for where I live, in a 2 adult, 1 child household, which is my household. The child is in college/university and no longer lives with us full time, but let's call us a 2 adult, 1 child family. The quote unquote living wage is slightly over 113,000 US dollars. I think personally, this is just my own, financial philosophizing, that particularly as the freelance population ages, I think a lot of freelancers may be in for a pretty tremendous shock when they find out either how long they're going to have to work in order to be able to afford to retire, or what their retirement is going to look like if they are living mostly off Social Security. Those are very personal decisions, but they're worth considering because, to be honest, what I would answer to that freelancer who asked me, what do you even do with all of the money you make? My answer would be, it allows me to not worry about money. I'm actually quite a frugal person. My husband is too, and we live financially quite conservatively. We don't spend money on luxurious things other than we love to travel. So we spend a lot of money on traveling. But we live in a very small house. We bought our first ever brand new car a year and a half ago. So we were both over 50 before we owned a car that had been bought brand new. Don't really eat out much at all, things like that. But my answer would be, when we have an unexpected bill, I don't actually worry about how we're going to pay that. Oh no, our furnace died and now we have to pay $5,000 for a new furnace. I don't actually stress out about where that money is going to come from, nor do I worry what life is going to look like when at some point in the future, both of us retire, because we've been saving for that our whole adult lives. Let's move on to, what do we mean by not making enough money? A disclaimer I want to give here is, when I talk about not making enough money, the first year that I was a freelancer, that was in 2002, I made 9,000 US dollars and I was thrilled, because my biggest fear was that I would make $0,000, that I would sort of have a birthday party that no one came to, and I would put a lot of work into a freelance business and not have any clients. So I was thrilled with that number. It then took me 13 years of freelancing to hit $100,000 in gross freelance income. What I'm saying here is not in any way intended to shame anyone at a lower income level, and definitely not to talk you out of being happy at a lower income level. To be honest, once I semi-retire, which I would say will probably be in another 15-ish years, I actually look forward to, at that point, making less money. For example, translating books, just working on things that I find interesting, and maybe donating the money to charity. But One thing I find that freelancers who feel that they are not making enough money have in common is that they don't know why. And again, this sounds basic, but it is just true that in my experience, there are only three ways to not make enough money. And many freelancers don't know which of these categories they fall into. And those are category one, you just plain don't have enough work. That was my situation from about 2002 to 2005. I would have loved to work more, but I didn't have enough clients to fill up my schedule, and I didn't want to work at low rates just to bring in some work. And I still believe that that was the right decision. I actually think that it is not true that working is always better than not working. And I'm actually glad that I sort of grew my business in a sustainable way. If you take any and all work that comes through the door, you have problem number two, which is that you have enough work, but it's low paying. And honestly, that applies to a lot of people. I think particularly people who do only translation. So they don't interpret, edit, subtitle, multilingual SEO. All they do is translate. And a lot of those people cruised along for years or even decades, getting paid pretty well to translate for agencies. A lot of those agencies have now gone to machine translation plus human editing, and a lot of them offer really dramatically lower hourly rates than what they used to pay by the word. So let's say these translators made, I don't know, like 10 to 14 cents a word for 20 years translating for agencies, and now all of a sudden the only work that they can find is post editing machine translation for like 28 US dollars an hour. Or you can have a third problem, which is that you have enough well paying work, but you don't have enough of it. This was true of the conference interpreting side of my business when I finished my master's in conference interpreting. The conference interpreting work that I found paid really well, but it took me almost a year. I finished my conference interpreting master's in the spring/summer of 2021, and it really took until I put in the post the spring/summer of 2022. But honestly, there's not that much conference interpreting work in the summer, and so it was more like the fall of 2023 until I had the amount of conference interpreting work that I wanted. So, what I found was great, but I just didn't have enough of it. Now, if you find yourself in one of those situations, so again, just to recap, you just don't have enough work, period. You have enough work, but it's low paying, or you have well paying work, but not enough of it. What do you do? It really depends on the time that you have available and on the kind of work that you do. Now, the reason that I say the time that you have available is because it is really, really different if you are single and you live by yourself versus if you are the primary caregiver for a family of young children. And it depends. If you're a Croatian literary translator, you just are never going to make as much money as a Japanese financial translator. But here are a few ideas for you. The hardest situation is situation two. You are working a lot, but you're not making enough money because the problem is the large number of freelancers who are in that situation, I think often feel that they have so little time or energy to market to better paying clients that it becomes like this hamster wheel that you feel like you can never get off. When I talk to quite a few freelancers who say, I have to actually translate 40 hours a week to pay my bills, and so then my administrative work and marketing are on top of that, which I think for most people means you don't do the marketing. So in and of itself, that's an argument for trying not to get into that situation in the first place. Not telling yourself that it is better to work than not to work. I'll just accept this lousy rate rather than not working. Because I think sometimes, or even a lot of the time, you're better off turning down that low paying work and working on marketing instead of doing the low paying work. Example number one, you just don't have enough work. I think I've given this advice many times and it's basic, but I think it's helpful. Every second that you don't have work, you're marketing. You are applying to agencies, you are following up with agencies and you're looking for direct clients. And here is the advice that I have seen a number of, sort of freelance marketing gurus give in online groups that I'm in. You repeat that process consistently until you have a little bit more work than you want. Don't quit marketing when you find one new client, and don't keep marketing until you have so much work that you're like sleeping 3 hours a night. You're going to just do your marketing every second that you don't have paying work until you're kind of one step above the amount of work that you want to have. And I will say, I made a lot of mistakes as a beginning freelancer, but one thing that I think I did correctly was this. If I wanted to work, my daughter was a baby when I first started freelancing. So let's say that I wanted to work 10 hours a week, which for me was pretty realistic. Like 2 hours a day was about all that I could manage because I was the primary caregiver for her. If I wanted 10 hours a week of paying work and I only had 1 hour, which happens sometimes, I marketed for 9 hours. And I really think that that, for me, was a sustainable way of building the business. If you are in situation 3, you have well-paying work but not enough of it, you just keep marketing to clients like the well-paying clients you already have. In a way, I think this is the easiest situation because no client is really that unique. You can always find more clients like your current clients. So in my case, once I identified a few sources of well-paying conference interpreting clients, I just kept looking for ways to connect with other clients like them, and that worked out quite well. We just wrapped up the first quarter of 2025. I'll do a little wrap-up post on that on my blog pretty soon. But if you are hoping to boost your income in the next quarter, I hope that those tips are helpful. So thanks for listening to episode 13 of the Training for Translators podcast. The podcast is hosted by me, Corinne McKay. You can visit trainingfortranslators.com for more information about my classes and challenge groups. I host the podcast technologically on Libsyn, and I record and edit it in Audacity using a Shure MV7 Plus microphone. Thanks very much, and I'll talk to you in a future episode.